The house was a tomb of silence after the funeral, every shadow heavy with the ghost of a life I could no longer touch. I sat at the dining table, a cold, half-drunk cup of coffee in my hands, its bitter dregs mirroring the ache in my chest. Loneliness clung to me, thick as winter fog, suffocating, relentless, a weight that threatened to pull me under. The world felt hollow, stripped of warmth, of meaning, of him. Each creak of the floorboards echoed like a heartbeat I could no longer hear, and I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. Just as the night seemed ready to swallow me, a soft knock broke the stillness, tentative, almost apologetic. My heart stuttered, wary, confused, but I rose, drawn to the sound like a moth to faint light. Opening the door, I found Jason, my son's best friend, standing beneath the dim glow of the porch light. His eyes held something unreadable, a depth that stirred the air between us, heavy with unspoken promises. No longer the gangly boy who'd sprawled across my couch, laughing over late-night video games. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved with a quiet strength that seemed to anchor the night itself. The silence stretched, taut, fragile until he spoke, his voice low, steady. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words, simple, sincere, pierced the fog of my grief. In his hands, a small casserole dish, a humble offering that felt like a lifeline. I nodded, voiceless, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping aside, letting him into the house that hungered for life, for sound, for something to fill the void that threatened to consume me. The house seemed to exhale as Jason stepped inside, its hunger for life momentarily sated by his presence. I closed the door behind him, the soft click a fragile barrier against the weight of the night. He set the casserole on the kitchen counter, his movements careful, deliberate, as if he sensed the delicate thread holding me together. The dim light caught the lines of his face, no longer boyish, but etched with a quiet resolve. A man who had tasted the world's burdens and carried them without breaking. For a moment, we stood in the kitchen, the silence between us thick, not with awkwardness, but with something heavier, something alive. I felt it in my bones, a current stirring beneath the surface of my grief, unsettling, unfamiliar, yet not unwelcome. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft, searching, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. It wasn't the hollow sympathy I'd grown used to, the empty platitudes that piled like ash around me. His gaze saw me, truly saw me, peeling back the layers of sorrow I'd wrapped myself in. I tried to smile, but it came out brittle, a cracked thing. "Surviving," I said, my voice fracturing on the word, betraying the truth I couldn't hide. Jason hesitated, then reached out, his hand brushing mine, not fleeting, not cautious, but steady, grounding, like an anchor in a storm. The warmth of his touch sent a tremor through me, a spark that flickered against the cold hollow inside my chest. I wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of my pain, to shield myself from the danger of feeling again. But I didn't. Something in me, some small, stubborn ember, refused to let go of that warmth. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, his voice almost shy, as if he feared crossing a line he couldn't see. I looked around the kitchen, at the shadows pooling in the corners, at the photographs still lining the walls, their frozen smiles a cruel reminder of what was gone. The silence of the house pressed down, oppressive, suffocating, and I knew I couldn't bear it alone tonight. "Yes," I whispered, the words slipping out before doubt could choke it back. "Please." We moved to the living room, a space once filled with laughter, now a mausoleum of memories. I curled into one end of the couch, pulling a throw blanket over my lap, a flimsy shield against the ache within. Jason sat on the opposite end, his posture careful, respectful, yet his presence filled the room like a melody, soft but undeniable. For a while we spoke of small things, his new job, the way the neighborhood had shifted while he was away at college, the mundane threads of life weaving a fragile normalcy. But the conversation turned, as if drawn by gravity to deeper waters. He asked about my husband, about what I missed most, his voice gentle, unhurried, inviting me to unravel the knots I'd tied around my heart. I hesitated, the words lodged in my throat, heavy with the fear that speaking them would break me. But his eyes, steady, patient, held no judgment, only a quiet urging to let go. So I spoke, haltingly at first, of the late-night laughter that used to fill this house, of quiet mornings spent in comfortable silence, of glances that carried entire conversations without a word. The memories poured out, raw, jagged, each one a shard of glass cutting deeper, yet somehow lighter in the telling. Jason listened, his attention a gift, unwavering, unbroken, as if every word I spoke mattered. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop, the dam inside me cracking under the weight of his presence. When I finally fell silent, my chest tight with the ache of it all, he leaned forward, his voice low, raw. "You're allowed to miss him," he said, "and still need someone." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me, stirring truths I hadn't dared face. I closed my eyes, steadying myself against the flood of emotion, the truth of his words too bright, too sharp. When I opened my eyes, he was closer, his face shadowed, but his eyes luminous, alive with something that wasn't pity, wasn't obligation, but something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken. The air between us crackled, charged with a possibility I hadn't felt in years. My breath caught, my heart thudding against the cage of my ribs, uncertain, afraid, yet inexplicably drawn to him. He shifted, his knee brushing mine, the contact accidental but electric, a spark that burned through the fog of my grief. I could have moved away, could have rebuilt the walls I'd spent weeks fortifying, but I stayed, rooted, letting the warmth of that touch seep into the cold spaces inside me. His eyes searched mine, careful, giving me every chance to retreat, but I didn't. I reached out, my fingers curling around his, tentative, trembling, yet certain in a way I couldn't explain. His hand was warm, steady, slightly rough, a contrast to the fragility I felt within. He turned his palm upward, intertwining his fingers with mine, the gesture so simple, so intimate, it stole the air from my lungs. He moved closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat of him, the quiet strength that seemed to hold the night at bay. His hand rose, hesitant, to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips grazing my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with something like awe, a sincerity that pierced me, unraveling the lies I'd told myself about being broken, unwanted. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away, leaning into his touch, letting his hand cradle my cheek. The world fell away, the grief, the loneliness, the endless weight of loss, until there was only this moment, only us. His breath was warm against my lips, a pause, a final offering of retreat, but I didn't want it. I closed the distance, my lips meeting his, soft, tentative, a question asked in silence. He answered, his kiss deepening, hungry, as if we were both chasing something we'd lost. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt held, truly held, not as a shadow of who I'd been, but as who I was now. The kiss grew urgent, a tide pulling us under, my hand sliding up his chest, feeling the solid reality of him, grounding me in a way I hadn't known I needed. He pulled back, just enough to search my eyes, looking for doubt, for regret, but finding only want, only need. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough, low. I nodded, words failing me, my heart pounding with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. He stood taking my hand, leading me towards the staircase, each step heavy with anticipation, each glance between us a promise of something new, something alive, something worth risking everything for. Morning crept into the room, its soft light spilling over the tangled sheets, casting a glow that felt both tender and cruel. I stirred, my body still heavy with the warmth of the night, half expecting to find the bed empty, the fleeting magic of Jason's presence dissolved into the harsh reality of day. But he was there, his arm draped over me, his breath steady against my hair, a quiet anchor in the storm of my doubts. For a moment, I let myself linger in that embrace, soaking in the safety of his nearness, the rhythm of his heartbeat a reminder that I was not alone. Yet, even as my body surrendered to the comfort, my mind began to unravel, threads of fear weaving through the fragile peace. Reality pressed in, cold, insistent, whispering questions I wasn't ready to answer. What we had shared was beautiful, sacred even, a fleeting sanctuary in the ruins of my grief. But could it withstand the daylight, the weight of a world that judged, that dissected, that demanded explanations? I was older, scarred by loss, carrying a lifetime of wounds he could never fully understand. Jason was young, vibrant, his life an unwritten page, while mine felt like a book half read, its chapters stained with sorrow. What if this was a mistake, a moment of weakness that would fade in the clarity of morning? I shifted, the movement slight but enough to rouse him. His fingers traced lazy patterns along my arm, his touch gentle, unhurried, as if he sensed the battle raging within me. "Penny, for your thoughts," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, warm with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I traced idle circles on his chest, my fingers trembling with the weight of truths I couldn't voice. How could I tell him I was terrified, that part of me believed this was too good, too fragile to be real? "I was just thinking," I said softly, my words careful, measured, "that last night felt like a dream I don't deserve." His hand stilled and he lifted my chin, his eyes meeting mine with a clarity that cut through the fog of my fear. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no flicker of doubt, only a fierce, unwavering sincerity. "It was real," he said, his voice firm, steady, every second of it. His words were a lifeline, but the doubts clung stubbornly, their whispers insidious, relentless. What would the world think if they knew? Would they see me as desperate, a grieving widow clinging to a younger man's kindness? Would Jason one day wake, see me through clearer eyes, and realize I was a burden, a complication he didn't need? I pulled the blanket tighter, as if it could shield me from the inevitable hurt, the judgment I imagined lurking beyond these walls. My heart pounded, a traitor to the calm I wanted to feel. Jason sat up slightly, propping himself on one elbow, his gaze softening as he studied me. "You're overthinking again?" he said, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "You do that when you're scared." I blinked, startled by how easily he saw through me, how he read the shadows I thought I'd hidden. "Maybe I am scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, raw with vulnerability. "You're young, Jason. Your whole life is ahead of you. I don't want to be the mistake you regret." His face softened further, and he reached out, cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't felt fall. "You're not a mistake," he said, his voice low, resolute. "You're the bravest, most beautiful woman I know." The words struck deep, unraveling the lies I'd told myself, the fears that had rooted in my heart. I wanted to believe him, to hold onto the truth in his eyes. But old wounds whispered of betrayal, of loss, of love that slipped through fingers like sand. I turned my face into his palm, seeking the warmth of his touch, trying to silence the doubts that clawed at me. "What happens now?" I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. "When the world comes back, when it's not just us in this room." Jason hesitated, his brow furrowing as he weighed his words, his honesty as disarming as his touch. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted, his voice soft but certain. "But I know what I feel, and I'm not walking away from you." His words settled over me, a balm to the raw edges of my fear, soothing but not erasing the uncertainty that lingered. I wanted to trust him, to trust this fragile thing between us, but the world outside felt like a storm waiting to break. The knock at the door startled us both, sharp, intrusive, shattering the cocoon we'd built. Jason glanced at me, his eyes asking if I wanted him to answer, but I shook my head, pulling on my sweater, smoothing my hair as if I could smooth away the chaos within. Whoever it was, they could wait. I needed a moment to gather myself, to decide how much of last night's magic I was willing to expose to the world. As I moved toward the door, Jason came up behind me, his arm slipping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. His warmth grounded me, a quiet reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. "Whatever comes next," he said, his voice low, steady, "we face it together." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow, a promise that pierced the fog of my fear. I leaned back into him, letting his strength steady me, letting myself believe, if only for a moment, that this could be real. The world outside could wait, its judgments, its questions, its relentless scrutiny. For now, there was only us, tethered by a night that had changed everything, a night that had reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling, of hoping, of loving. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to carry me forward, to face the uncertainties not with fear, but with the quiet courage of knowing I wasn't alone. The days that followed were a delicate dance, a weaving of light and shadow, hope and hesitation. The magic of that night lingered, a quiet ember in my chest, but the world outside pressed close, its weight threatening to smother the fragile thing we'd kindled. Jason remained steady, his presence a constant against my doubts, his patience a balm to the fears that surfaced in the quiet moments. When I faltered, pulling back into the familiar cocoon of grief, he didn't push, didn't demand, but reached for me with gentle persistence, his hand finding mine, his gaze anchoring me to the present. We kept our connection close, a secret shared in stolen glances, in brushes of fingers that sparked warmth in the hollow places of my heart. The world didn't need to know, not yet, not when every moment felt like a step on unsteady ground, a leap towards something I wasn't sure I could trust. We built something new in those quiet spaces, in late-night talks that stitched together the frayed edges of my soul, in mornings where his smile greeted me like dawn after a long night. There were challenges, of course, moments when doubt crept in, sharp and cold, whispering that this was too good, too improbable to last. What did a man like Jason, full of youth and possibility, see in someone like me, worn by loss, marked by years he hadn't lived? But he never wavered, his actions louder than my fears, his touch a reminder that I was not a burden, not a mistake, but someone seen, someone wanted. He made me feel cherished, not despite my scars, but because of them, as if they were proof of a life fiercely lived, a heart that still beat despite its breaks. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber, We sat on the porch, the air soft with the promise of summer. Jason took my hand, his fingers warm, steady, intertwining with mine as if they belonged there. "You saved me too," he said, his voice low, raw, the words catching me off guard. I turned to him, my eyes stinging with tears I hadn't expected, and saw the truth in his gaze, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. This wasn't just about healing my wounds, I realized, but about building something mutual, something neither of us had anticipated, but both of us needed. His words settled deep, a seed planted in the cracks of my broken heart, stubborn, beautiful, defying the odds. We faced the world together, step by cautious step, navigating the whispers of judgment, the raised eyebrows, the questions neither of us could fully answer. But with each challenge, Jason stood beside me, his presence a shield, his laughter a light that cut through the dark. Our connection wasn't perfect, wasn't a fairy tale with neat edges, but it was honest, raw, alive in a way that made my pulse quicken. I learned to lean into it, to trust the warmth of his hand in mine, the quiet promises in his eyes. The grief didn't vanish, it never would, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became part of a larger tapestry, woven with threads of hope, of tenderness, of a love that had slipped in quietly, unexpectedly, filling the spaces I thought would stay empty forever. As the days turned to weeks, I felt myself changing, softening, daring to believe in a future I hadn't imagined. Jason didn't erase the past, didn't try to, but he gave me a present worth living for, a reason to step forward without fear. In his arms, I found not just solace, but strength, not just comfort, but courage. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Not to forget what was lost, but to embrace what could be found. A love that bloomed against all odds, messy, beautiful, undeniably real.